August 1st, 1941. The port of San Pedro, California. The heat coming off the tarmac is enough to distort the air, shimmering in waves of hazy gray. But it isn't the heat that makes Lieutenant Commander Kenjiro Oki sweat in his wool naval uniform. It is the silence. For 3 years, Oki, a technical liaison for the Imperial Japanese Navy's Fuel Bureau, has stood on this dock and listened to the rhythmic, mechanical heartbeat of the modern world. He is accustomed to the groan of cranes, the hiss of steam, and the deep, guttural thrum of pumps pushing thousands of gallons of viscous bunker C fuel oil into the bellies of Japanese tankers. Today, the pumps are silent. Oki watches a seagull land on the dry valve of a massive, glistening pipe. Below it, the Japanese tanker San Luis Maru sits high in the water, its red hull paint exposed, looking naked and vulnerable. A dock foreman, a man Oki has shared cigarettes with for months, walks past, refusing to make eye contact. He carries a clipboard and a padlock. Oki steps forward, the gravel crunching loudly under his polished shoes. "Mr. Henderson," Oki says, his English perfect, honed by years at Stanford, "the pressure gauges are reading 0. We are scheduled to load 12,000 tons before the tide turns." Henderson stops. He spits tobacco juice onto the concrete, perilously close to Oki's shoe. He finally looks up, and there is no friendship in his eyes anymore, only a cold, bureaucratic wall. "Taps are off, Commander," Henderson says, snapping the padlock onto the valve wheel. "President signed the order this morning. Executive Order 8832, no more oil, no more AV gas. You verify with your embassy." Oki stares at the padlock. It is a cheap piece of steel, costing perhaps 50 cents. Yet, as the sun beats down on his neck, he realizes with a sickening drop in his stomach that this 50-cent lock has just strangled the Imperial Navy. He looks past the foreman, toward the horizon of the Los Angeles coastline. Rows of white storage tanks stretch for miles, gleaming like pearls. He knows the numbers by heart. The United States produces 60% of the world's oil. They refine it faster than they can pump it. Japan produces less than 7% of its own needs. The rest, the lifeblood of every Zero fighter, every battleship, every factory, comes from right here. Oki turns back to the San Luis Maru. It isn't just a ship anymore. It is a tombstone. August 14th, 1941. The Navy Ministry, Tokyo. The air in the conference room is thick with cigarette smoke and denial. Oki stands before a map of the Pacific that covers the entire wall. Seated at the long mahogany table are men with gold braid on their cuffs and stars on their collars. Their faces are hard, sculpted by the conviction of Bushido and the arrogance of unchecked victories in China. "The Americans are bluffing," Admiral Nagano says, dismissing the report Oki has placed in front of him. "They will not go to war over trade restrictions." "It is not a restriction, Admiral. It is a strangulation," Oki says, his voice steady despite his trembling hands. He points to the red line he has drawn across the Pacific. "I have run the calculations. The Imperial Navy consumes 12,000 tons of fuel per day during peacetime operations. In wartime, that triples." He walks to the blackboard. The chalk squeaks, a jarring sound in the quiet room. He writes a single number, 5 million. "This is our reserve, 5 million tons. If we do nothing, the Navy is dry in 2 years. If we fight..." Oki erases the number and writes 18 months. "Then we take the Dutch East Indies," a voice booms from the end of the table. "Balikpapan, Palembang. There is enough oil there to float the entire combined fleet." Oki turns to face the speaker. It is a planner from the General Staff, a man who sees oil as water, something you simply scoop up. "Sir," Oki says, "the Dutch wells are rigged for sabotage. Even if we capture them intact, we lack the tankers to bring it back. Our tanker fleet is designed for short hauls, not dodging American submarines across 3,000 miles of ocean. And the refining capacity, the crude from Borneo, is heavy. It is not the sweet, light crude we get from California. It requires high-grade cracking plants to turn into aviation fuel, plants we do not have." The room goes silent. Oki is breaking the unwritten rule. He is bringing mathematics to a spiritual fight. He is telling samurai that their swords are useless without the grease to draw them from the sheath. "You speak of logistics, Commander," Admiral Nagano says, his voice low and dangerous. We speak of destiny. Do you suggest we bow to the Americans? To accept the humiliation of withdrawal from China? I suggest, Oki says, that we recognize the scale of the industrial giant we are provoking. I saw the refineries in San Pedro, Admiral. They spill more oil in a day than we refine in a month. If we go to war, we must win it in 6 months. If the war lasts a year, our pilots will be training on bicycles. If it lasts 2, he trails off. He doesn't need to finish the sentence. Nagano stands up, signaling the end of the briefing. Thank you for your technical assessment, Commander. But the spirit of the Yamato spirit is not fueled by oil alone. It is fueled by will. Oki bows low, gathering his papers. As he walks out of the heavy oak doors, he feels a profound sense of isolation. He is an engineer in a room of warriors. They see the glory of the coming battle. He sees only the gauge on the dashboard, the needle hovering just above empty, and the foot slamming down on the accelerator. He walks down the corridor of the ministry, passing young officers laughing, talking about the southern push. Oki grips his briefcase tighter. He knows something they don't. He knows that the war isn't going to be decided by the caliber of their guns or the courage of their pilots. It was decided 2 weeks ago by a dock foreman named Henderson, snapping a padlock shut in the California sun. December 8, 1941. Imperial Navy General Staff Office, Tokyo. The sun has not yet risen over Tokyo, but the ministry is ablaze with light. Outside, the pre-dawn air is crisp, but inside the map room, the atmosphere is sweltering, thick with the smell of cheap tea and the ozone of telegraph machines working at maximum capacity. Lieutenant Commander Kenjiro Oki stands at the periphery of a group of officers who are cheering. A young ensign is pinning small paper flags, red circles, onto a map of Oahu. They are pinned directly over Battleship Row, the Arizona, the Oklahoma, the West Virginia. The reports filtered through the encrypted purple cables are ecstatic. The American Pacific Fleet has been broken in a single morning. Oki doesn't cheer. He moves closer to the table, his eyes scanning the reconnaissance photographs developed from the first wave's flight. These are grainy, black and white stills taken from the cockpits of Nakajima B-5N Kate torpedo bombers. He sees the towering plumes of smoke, the oily slicks spreading across the harbor, and the twisted superstructures of the great dreadnoughts. But Oki's eyes aren't on the ships. He pulls a magnifying loupe from his pocket and leans over the image of the submarine base and the area adjacent to the naval shipyard. There, sitting in neat, geometric rows, are the white circles he saw months ago in California, the tank farms. "Commander Oki," a captain barks, slapping him on the shoulder. "Why the long face? We have sunk their line of battle. The Americans are retreating to San Diego as we speak." "Sir," Oki says, his voice sounding thin in the crowded room. "Look at the shadows in the second wave photos. The smoke is coming from the ships. But look at the hill. Look at the upper tank farm." The captain glances at the photo. "What of it? It's just storage. We were there to sink the steel giants, not the sheds." "Those sheds, Captain, contain 4.5 million barrels of fuel oil," Oki says, his finger trembling as he points to the untouched white cylinders. "Every drop of fuel the Americans have in the Central Pacific is sitting right there, above ground, unprotected. One squadron of Val dive bombers could have ignited the entire supply." The captain laughs, a harsh, dismissive sound. "We have destroyed their ability to fight. Without battleships, what do they need oil for? They are finished." Oki looks back at the photo. He thinks of the math again. If those tanks had been destroyed, the American carriers, which were not in port, would have had no place to refuel. They would have been forced to retreat 2,500 miles back to the West Coast. The entire Pearl Harbor base would have become a ghost town. It would have taken the Americans a year, perhaps 2, to rebuild the infrastructure and haul that much oil back across the ocean. Instead, the victory was incomplete. Admiral Nagumo, fearful of American land-based bombers and not knowing the location of the U.S. carriers, had called off the third wave. He had played it safe. "We left the gas in the tank," Oki whispers to himself. December 24th, 1941. Aboard the transport ship Ryujo Maru, South China Sea. 2 weeks later, Oki is no longer in a comfortable office. He has been assigned as a technical advisor to the invasion force heading for the Dutch East Indies. The WWII is part of a massive convoy, a forest of masts and smokestacks cutting through the choppy, slate-gray waters of the South China Sea. The ship is overloaded. Soldiers of the 16th Army are crammed into every available space, cleaning their Type 38 rifles and sharpening bayonets. But Oki is in the hold, staring at the fuel bunkers. The ship's engineer, a man named Sato, with grease permanently etched into the lines of his face, meets him with a grim expression. We're burning too much, Sato says, tapping a flickering gauge. This heavy crude we took on in Taiwan, it's fouling the sprayers. The boilers are coughing like an old man with pneumonia. It's the viscosity, Oki explains, leaning over the vibrating machinery. It wasn't refined properly for this engine. We're pushing these ships at 16 knots to keep up with the destroyers, but we're losing 20% of our efficiency to heat loss and soot. He reaches out and touches the bulkhead. He can feel the vibration of the engines, but it feels frantic, not powerful. We are racing toward the oil fields of Borneo, Oki says, but we are burning our reserves just to get there. It is a paradox, Sato. We are a thirsty man running through a desert toward a well, but the faster we run, the more we sweat out the little water we have left. Suddenly, the ship shudders. It isn't an explosion, but a sharp, violent course correction. Above them, a siren begins to wail. A long, mournful cry that signals an air raid or a submarine contact. Oki and Sato scramble up the iron ladders to the deck. The humid, tropical air hits them like a wet blanket. On the horizon, one of the escorting destroyers is turning hard to port, its 5-inch guns barking at the water. A white streak, a torpedo track, slices through the waves, missing the bow of the Ryujo Maru by less than 50 meters. Oki grips the railing, his knuckles white. It is a Dutch or American submarine, a lone predator stalking the herd. They know, Oki says, watching the destroyer drop depth charges that send geysers of white foam into the air. Know what, Commander? Sato asks, wiping sweat from his brow. They know we are a long-lance empire with a short leash. They don't need to sink our battleships. They just need to sink these. Oki gestures to the lumbering transport ships and the few precious tankers in the center of the formation. As the sun sets, casting a blood-red glow over the water, Oki looks at the silhouettes of the fleet. He knows that in Tokyo, they are celebrating the fall of Hong Kong and the advances in Malaya. But he is looking at the wake of the ships, the long, churning trails of white water. Every mile they travel away from Japan is a mile they have to supply. The Imperial Navy is expanding like a balloon, and Oki knows that the thinner the skin of a balloon gets, the easier it is to pop with a single needle. He returns to his cabin and opens his ledger. He calculates the distance from the captured fields in Palembang back to the refineries in Kyushu. Then he calculates the average tonnage of a standard Japanese tanker. He stares at the final number for a long time. Japan doesn't have enough tankers to move the oil they are about to capture. They are winning the territory, but they are losing the logistics. The southern resource area is a gold mine, but the road leading to it is being patrolled by wolves, and Japan is trying to carry the gold in leaking buckets. He closes the ledger and blows out his lamp, but the rhythmic thrum, thrum, thrum of the engine keeps him awake. It sounds like a heart beating faster and faster, heading toward a stroke. February 16th, 1942. The Palembang Oil Refineries, Sumatra. The air over Sumatra doesn't just smell of the tropics. It smells of scorched earth and sulfur. Lieutenant Commander Kenjiro Oki stands at the edge of the Pladjo refinery, his boots sinking into the soft, oil-slicked mud. Just days ago, Japanese paratroopers, the Heavenly Soldiers, dropped into this green hell to seize the crown jewel of the Dutch East Indies. They succeeded, but the victory is a blackened, twisted ruin. Before him, the massive distillation towers, which once processed the finest crude in the world, are skeletal remains. The retreating Dutch followed a scorched earth policy with terrifying efficiency. They didn't just turn off the valves. They blew the heads off the wells, dynamited the cracking units, and set the storage tanks ablaze. Oki covers his mouth with a handkerchief as a thick, oily soot falls from the sky like black snow. "Commander," a young lieutenant from the engineering corps says, running up to him. He is covered in grease, his face smeared with carbon. "We've managed to put out the fires at the main pumping station, but the Dutch threw the heavy machinery parts into the river. The precision gauges, the control valves, they're gone. Oki walks toward a row of shattered pipes. He touches the cold steel. And the wells? Capped with concrete or blown, the lieutenant replies. Our experts say it will take 6 months to get the first gallon of refined aviation spirit out of this facility, maybe a year to reach full capacity. Oki looks at the horizon, where the smoke from the still-burning sea of fire blocks out the sun. 6 months. He thinks back to the ledger in his cabin. Every day the refineries are silent is a day the Imperial Navy burns through its dwindling stockpiles back home. We don't have 6 months, Oki mutters. He turns his gaze toward the harbor. Even if the refinery was running at 100% today, the problem remains visible in the bay. There are only 3 tankers anchored there, small and old. To move the volume of oil Japan needs, there should be dozens. March 12, 1942, aboard the heavy cruiser Chokai off the coast of Java. Oki has been summoned to a tactical briefing. The mood among the fleet officers is one of invincible triumph. Singapore has fallen. The American, British, Dutch, and Australian fleet was decimated at the Battle of the Java Sea. The greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere is no longer a dream. It is a map painted red. But Oki is focused on a different map, a map of the shipping lanes. The resource loop is complete, Admiral Ozawa announces to the gathered officers. We have the rubber of Malaya, the tin of Thailand, and now the oil of the Indies. The empire is self-sufficient. Oki raises his hand. The room goes quiet. He is becoming known as the Prophet of Gloom, but his rank and technical expertise demand a hearing. Admiral, if I may, Oki begins, stepping to the chart. We have the oil in the ground, yes, but we are currently facing a bottleneck of the sea. Our merchant marine, the Kyoryu fleet, is being diverted to carry troops and ammunition for the next phase of expansion into the Solomons and New Guinea. He draws a line from Sumatra to Tokyo. A tanker takes 12 days to make this trip, provided it isn't hunted. To keep our current pace, we need 2.5 million tons of tanker capacity. We currently have less than 1.1 million, and every time we move the front line further south, we increase the distance our tankers must travel, which effectively reduces our capacity even further. A colonel from the Army side of the room snorts. The Americans are hiding in Pearl Harbor and Brisbane. Their submarines are defective. Our reports show their torpedoes fail to explode half the time. You worry about ghosts, Commander. I worry about arithmetic, Oki counters. The Americans are building T-2 tankers by the dozen. Their shipyards in Kaiser and Sunship are launching hulls in weeks, not months. While we struggle to repair a single sabotaged refinery, they are building a bridge of steel across the Pacific. We are expanding our perimeter, but we are not expanding our lungs. We are getting bigger, but we are getting out of breath. The Admiral sighs, a sound of weary patience. Commander Oki, your technical insights are noted, but the decisive battle is coming. Once we crush the American carriers, the sea will be ours. The tankers will sail unmolested. You focus on getting the Palembang wells flowing. Let the warriors worry about the path. Oki bows, the familiar weight of frustration settling in his chest. As he leaves the bridge, he looks down at the Chokai's wake. The cruiser is moving at a steady 20 knots. It is a beautiful, lethal machine. But he knows that every hour this ship spends at this speed, it consumes enough fuel to power a small city. He walks to the rail and looks out at the vast, shimmering expanse of the Indian Ocean. It is beautiful, but to him, it looks like a desert. He realizes that the Japanese leadership views the ocean as a battlefield where ships fight and die. They don't see it for what it truly is, a conveyor belt. And if the Americans ever figure out how to stop that belt, the invincible Imperial Navy will become the world's largest collection of floating scrap metal. He reaches into his pocket and pulls out a small piece of charred concrete from the Palembang refinery. He carries it as a reminder. The Dutch didn't just break the machines. They showed the world that oil is the ultimate vulnerability. Oki looks at his watch. Somewhere in the United States, it is yesterday. He imagines the lights of the refineries in Texas and California, burning bright, protected by 2 oceans, pumping out the high-octane lifeblood that will eventually come to reclaim these islands. He feels like a man watching a slow-motion car crash, unable to scream loud enough to make the driver hit the brakes. May 25, 1942, Hashirajima Anchorage, Hiroshima Bay. The sheer scale of the gathering is enough to take one's breath away. Lieutenant Commander Kenjiro Oki stands on the deck of the tender Akashi, looking out over the water of the inland sea. It is a forest of steel. The Yamato, the largest battleship ever built, sits like a mountain of iron in the center, flanked by the carriers Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. Over 150 ships are preparing to sail for Operation Amwine, the invasion of Midway. To the young sailors cheering on the decks, it is the beginning of the end for the Americans. To Oki, it looks like a massive, terrifying drain. He looks at his clipboard, his eyes stinging from the glare of the sun on the water. He has just finished overseeing the final fueling of the first air fleet. 25 million gallons, Oki whispers. That is the amount of precious, refined oil this single operation will consume. It is nearly 10% of the Empire's total remaining naval reserve. The decisive battle that the admirals have been dreaming of is finally here, but they are betting the entire remaining contents of Japan's fuel tank on a single throw of the dice. "Commander Oki," a voice calls out. It is Captain Yanagimoto of the Soryu. He looks resplendent in his whites. "The men are in high spirits. By next month, we will be docking in Honolulu." "I hope so, Captain," Oki says, forced to maintain the mask of optimism. "I have ensured the Soryu's bunkers are topped with the highest grade 92 octane we have left. Please, tell your pilots to be mindful of their mixtures during the cruise." Yanagimoto laughs. In the heat of battle, Oki, a pilot thinks of his target, not his fuel gauge. We have plenty of time to worry about economy when the American fleet is at the bottom of the sea. As the Soryu weighs anchor, its massive screws churning the water into a white froth, Oki feels a cold knot of dread. He knows something the captain doesn't. He knows that to assemble this fleet, Japan has had to strip the defenses of the home islands. There are no tankers left to spare for the merchant routes. For the next 3 weeks, the conveyor belt from Sumatra will effectively stop because every available escort and oiler is tied to the Midway strike force. June 5, 1942, the Central Pacific. The decisive battle did not go as planned. Oki is not at Midway. He is stationed at a forward refueling point at Truk Lagoon, waiting for the triumphant return of the fleet. Instead, the radio room is a tomb of silence, punctuated by frantic, shattered code. Akagi hit. Kaga hit. Soryu, Captain Yanagimoto's ship, ablaze. As the catastrophic news trickles in, Oki doesn't join the officers in their stunned weeping or their outbursts of rage. He walks to the massive fuel piers of Truk. He watches the destroyer Nowaki limp into the lagoon, its hull scorched, its fuel tanks nearly bone dry. The destroyer had spent the last 12 hours at high speed, dodging SBD Dauntless dive bombers and searching for survivors in the water. It had burned its entire tactical reserve in a desperate, losing scramble. Oki watches as the refueling hoses are connected. The pumps begin to groan. Thrum, thrum, thrum. He realizes with a sickening clarity that the loss of the 4 carriers is only half the disaster. The other half is the hidden loss. Japan has just burned millions of gallons of oil for a negative return. They have no new territory. They have no destroyed American carriers to show for it. They have simply moved a massive amount of energy from their tanks into the atmosphere and the sea, and they have nothing left to replace it. "We just traded our future for a cloud of smoke," Oki says to a junior engineer standing near him. The engineer looks at him, confused. "But Commander, we still have the Yamato. We still have the battleships." "A battleship is a palace," Oki snaps, his frustration finally boiling over. "And like a palace, it is expensive to maintain. Do you know how much fuel the Yamato burns just to turn around in this lagoon? It burns more in an hour than a squadron of fighters burns in a week. We can't afford to move her. We have built the world's greatest fortress, but we can't afford the key to the front door." He looks out at the horizon. Somewhere out there, the American fleet is refueling, but they aren't heading back to a fixed base. His intelligence reports have mentioned something new, something the Japanese planners ignored: American oil squadrons. The Americans are developing the ability to refuel their ships while moving at sea. They are turning the entire Pacific into a gas station. Oki looks down at the black sludge leaking from a loose coupling on the pier. He realizes the pivot point of the war has passed. Midway wasn't just a tactical defeat. It was the moment Japan's fuel consumption officially began to outpace its ability to replenish. The Imperial Navy is now a dying fire. It can still flare up, it can still burn you if you get too close, but the wood is gone. Start the rationing orders, Oki tells his clerk. Cut training hours for all new pilot recruits by 50%. If they want to learn to fly, they can do it in simulators on the ground. We can't waste a single drop on practice anymore. But, sir, the clerk stammers, the pilots, they won't be ready for combat. They'll be ready to die, Oki says, turning away. And that's all the Empire is going to be able to ask of them from now on. January 14th, 1943. Technical Intelligence Division, Tokyo. The room is freezing. Japan is suffering through a bitter winter, and coal is being diverted to the steel mills, leaving the administrative offices of the Navy Ministry in a perpetual, numbing chill. Lieutenant Commander Kenjiro Oki sits at his desk, his fingers wrapped around a lukewarm cup of tea, staring at a stack of grainy aerial reconnaissance photographs captured from a downed American B-17. The photos show a section of the Pacific near the Gilbert Islands. At first glance, it looks like a standard American task force. But as Oki slides the magnifying loupe over the images, his breath hitches. It isn't a combat formation. It is a city. In the center of a ring of destroyers sits a cluster of massive, broad-beamed ships that Oki doesn't recognize from any Jane's Fighting Ships manual. They are cluttered with cranes, hoses, and stacks of crates. Side by side with a Fletcher-class destroyer is a T-2 tanker. They are moving. Even in the still photo, the white bone in the teeth at the bow of both ships proves they are making at least 10 knots. They are refueling underway. Oki leans back, the wood of his chair creaking in the silent office. In the Imperial Navy, refueling is a static, vulnerable process. You find a quiet lagoon, you anchor, you tie up to a jetty or a slow-moving oiler, and you pray no American submarine finds you while you are a sitting duck. But the Americans, they have solved the problem of the horizon. They are bringing the harbor to the fleet, Oki whispers. He looks at a second photo. It shows a service squadron, what the Americans call Servron. It isn't just fuel. There are repair ships that look like floating factories, refrigerator ships filled with tons of fresh meat and vegetables, and even a barge dedicated entirely to making ice cream. Oki looks down at his own breakfast, a small bowl of cold rice and a piece of pickled radish. He feels a sudden, sharp pang of vertigo. He is an engineer. He understands the industrial will that creates such a thing. To build a fleet that fights is one thing. To build a fleet that lives at sea, indefinitely, is another level of civilization entirely. Commander Oki? He looks up. It's a young intelligence officer looking pale. We've just received the monthly production reports from our agents in neutral South America regarding U.S. shipyards. Oki takes the paper. His eyes skip past the carriers and the cruisers. He goes straight to the tankers. Kaiser Shipyards, California, 15 T-2 tankers launched in December. Sun Shipbuilding, Pennsylvania, 12 T-2 tankers launched in December. Oki closes his eyes and does the math in his head. In 1 month, the United States has launched more tanker tonnage than Japan has produced in the last 3 years. By the time this war reaches its climax, the Americans will have enough fuel capacity to keep their entire navy at full throttle from Pearl Harbor to the coast of Honshu without ever needing to stop at a port. February 20th, 1943. Kure Naval Arsenal. Oki is standing on the docks of Kure, watching the refitting of the battleship Nagato. The ship is a marvel of 16-inch guns and pagoda masts, but it is surrounded by a fleet of small, wooden barges. Men are manually hauling crates of supplies onto the deck. It is an ancient, slow process. He meets with a shipyard foreman, a man who has spent 40 years building the pride of Japan. The new turbine designs, Oki says, pointing to a blueprint. We need to install the fuel preheaters. The oil coming from the Indies is too thick. It's clogging the injectors at high speeds. The foreman spits on the ground. With what steel, Commander? The ministry sent an order this morning. All high-grade alloys are diverted to the carrier program. I'm told to use secondary-grade iron for the piping. Secondary-grade iron will corrode in 6 months, Oki says, his voice rising. If the fuel lines burst in the middle of a high-speed maneuver, the engine room becomes a crematorium. The foreman looks at Oki with a hollow, tired expression. In 6 months, Commander, we might not have any oil to put in the pipes anyway. Have you seen the harbor lately? The tankers aren't coming back. Oki turns and looks toward the mouth of the bay. He's right. The anchorage is full of warships, but the Maru ships, the merchant tankers, are missing. The American submarine campaign, once a nuisance of doomed torpedoes, has suddenly turned lethal. The Americans have fixed their firing pins. They have moved their patrol zones into the convoy college lanes between Luzon and Formosa. Every week, Oki sees the red ink on the loss charts. Tayo Maru, sunk. Kyokuto Maru, sunk. Japan's lifeblood line is being cut vessel by vessel. And because Japan prioritized battleships over escort destroyers and tankers, they have no way to replace the losses. We are building swords, Oki says to the foreman, while the enemy is building the blacksmith shop. We can have the sharpest blade in the world, but if we can't get to the forge, the blade will eventually snap. He walks away from the Nagato, the massive ship looking less like a weapon and more like a drain. He thinks about the American service squadrons again. He imagines a young American sailor, thousands of miles from home, eating a bowl of chocolate ice cream on the deck of a destroyer while his ship takes on thousands of gallons of high-octane fuel at 20 knots. The American miracle wasn't a secret weapon or a master strategy. It was simply the fact that they treated logistics as a science, while Japan treated it as an afterthought. Oki stops by a small shrine near the shipyard gate. He bows, but he doesn't pray for victory. He prays for the men who are about to be sent into the Pacific in ships that are essentially starving. He realizes that the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere was a house built on a foundation of sand, and the tide of American oil is coming in fast to wash it all away. We are not fighting a navy, Oki writes in his private journal that night. We are fighting an ocean of oil that has been taught how to shoot. June 15th, 1944. Aboard the heavy cruiser Chokai, Philippine Sea. The heat in the engine room is 120 degrees, a wet, suffocating blanket that smells of salt and something much more dangerous, the sharp, acrid scent of raw volatiles. Lieutenant Commander Kenjiro Oki stands on the vibrating steel grating, his shirt plastered to his skin. He isn't looking at the gauges. He is looking at a leak. A tiny, misting spray of amber liquid is escaping from a flange near the primary boiler. "Don't touch it!" Oki screams over the roar of the turbines as a technician reaches forward with a rag. Oki grabs the man's arm and pulls him back. He takes a long wooden rod and holds it near the mist. The wood doesn't just catch fire, it practically explodes into flame. "This isn't refined bunker C," Oki says, his voice shaking with a mixture of rage and terror. "This is Tarakan crude. They're pumping it straight from the ground into our hulls." The chief engineer, a man who has aged a decade in the last year, nods grimly. "The refineries at Palembang are gone, Commander. B-24s hit the cracking towers last month. The tankers we have left can't make the trip to the home islands anymore. The sub-highways are too thick with Americans. The Admiral ordered us to fuel at the source." Oki stares at the leaking flange. Tarakan oil, pulled from the wells of Borneo, is unique and deadly. It is so light and so pure that it is flammable in its raw state. But it hasn't been cracked. It hasn't had the volatile naphtha and gases removed. "We are sailing on a lake of gasoline," Oki whispers. Every ship in Vice Admiral Ozawa's mobile fleet, the force meant to stop the American invasion of Saipan, is currently burning this engineer's nightmare. The fuel is so unstable that it gives off explosive vapors even at room temperature. If a single American shell, or even a stray spark from a wrench, hits a fuel line, the ship won't just burn. It will vaporize. June 19th, 1944. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Oki is on the bridge as the first strikes are launched. He watches the A-6M Ray-Sen Zeros and the new Jill torpedo bombers roar off the decks of the carriers Taiho and Shokaku. But even as the planes disappear into the bright Pacific blue, Oki sees the problem. The engines sound rough. They are sputtering. Because of the fuel shortage, these pilots have had their training hours cut to the bone. Some have less than 50 hours of total flight time. They are flying machines fueled by unstable, low-octane mixtures that foul spark plugs and cause engines to cough at high altitudes. "Contact! Submarine to starboard!" The scream from the lookout is followed almost immediately by a dull, rib-shaking thud. The Taiho, the newest and most modern carrier in the Imperial Navy, Oki's pride, has been hit. A single torpedo from the USS Albacore has struck near the fuel bunkers. Oki watches through his binoculars. At first, it doesn't look fatal. The carrier stays on an even keel. Her planes continue to land. But then, he sees it. A faint, shimmering haze rising from the elevator wells. The Tarakan vapors, Oki gasps. Because the ship is fueled with unrefined crude, the torpedo hit didn't just leak oil. It released a massive cloud of highly explosive gas into the enclosed hangar decks. For 6 hours, the Taiho is a ticking time bomb. The damage control teams, untrained and panicked, make the ultimate mistake. They turn on the ventilation fans to clear the smell. Instead of venting the gas, the fans push the explosive mixture into every corner of the ship. At 2:30 p.m., the miracle of Japanese engineering meets the reality of Japanese logistics. A spark, perhaps from a generator, ignites the air. The Taiho doesn't sink, it splits open. From his position on the chokai, Oki watches as the armored flight deck, the strongest ever built, is peeled back like a tin can. A pillar of fire reaches 1,000 feet into the sky. Minutes later, the carrier Shokaku is also hit. Its own unrefined fuel feeding a fire that cannot be extinguished. By sunset, the Imperial Navy has lost 3 carriers and nearly 400 aircraft. The American Task Force 58, fueled by a seemingly infinite supply of high-grade, 100-octane gasoline and protected by pilots with hundreds of hours of training, has swept the skies clean. Oki stands on the deck of the retreating chokai, watching the orange glow on the horizon where the Taiho used to be. He looks at the fuel gauge for the cruiser. They are at 15%. To get back to port, they will have to drop their speed to 12 knots, making them easy prey for any submarine in the area. "We didn't lose because of their pilots," Oki says to the empty air. He pulls a small glass vial from his pocket. Inside is a sample of the raw Tarakan crude he took from the engine room. It is dark, shimmering, and smells of rot. "We lost because we tried to fight a modern war with the contents of a puddle," he says. "We ran out of time. We ran out of skill, and finally, we just ran out of gas." He tosses the vial into the sea. He realizes that the decisive battle wasn't a battle at all. It was an execution, and the weapon used wasn't the American 5-inch gun or the Hellcat fighter. It was the math, the brutal, unforgiving math of the barrel. October 23rd, 1944, Palawan Passage, off the coast of the Philippines. The morning is eerily beautiful, the water a deep, glassy indigo. But Lieutenant Commander Kenjiro Oki cannot appreciate the view. He is currently aboard the heavy cruiser Atago, the flagship of Admiral Kurita's Center Force. This is the final gamble, Operation Shogo. The Japanese Navy is throwing every remaining hull, battleships, cruisers, and what few destroyers are left, into a massive pincer movement to stop the American landings at Leyte Gulf. But as Oki looks at the fleet around him, he sees a fractured command. The fleet has been forced to split. Half the force is coming from Japan, carrying the few remaining planes but almost no fuel. The other half, Kurita's force, is coming from the Lingga Roads near Singapore. "We are a fleet divided by a lack of oil," Oki mutters, checking the temperature of the Atago's fuel bunkers. Because the tankers can no longer reach Japan, the warships have been forced to stay near the southern oil wells. This meant they couldn't train with the carriers. Now, in the most complex naval operation in history, the two halves of the Imperial Navy are trying to coordinate via radio across thousands of miles of ocean, fueled by different grades of oil, with no air cover. Suddenly, the Atago lurches. It isn't a shell hit. It is the violent, sickening shudder of 4 torpedoes from the USS Darter slamming into the starboard side. Within seconds, the flagship, a 15,000-ton mountain of steel, begins to list. Oki is thrown against the bulkhead. He tastes blood. As he scrambles toward the deck, he sees the secondary explosions. They aren't the magazines, it's the fuel. The unrefined southern crude, still being used out of necessity, turns the interior of the ship into a blast furnace. As Oki leaps into the oil-slicked water, he watches the Atago sink in less than 20 minutes. The pride of the Navy is gone before it even saw an American ship. As he bobs in the water, covered in thick, black sludge, he sees the cruiser Maya disintegrate nearby, hit by the USS Dace. The convoy college, the shipping lane he once worried about, has become a graveyard. The American submarines have moved from hunting tankers to hunting the hunters. The blockade is complete. The conveyor belt is broken. February 10th, 1945. A forest near Kamikaze, Japan. Oki has been recalled to the home islands. He is no longer on a cruiser. He is standing in a muddy forest in the rain, surrounded by schoolgirls and elderly men. They are digging. "Commander," a young girl says, her face pale from malnutrition. She holds up a gnarled, dirt-covered object. "Is this one good?" Oki takes the pine root. He looks at it with a hollow, dead expression. This is the new superweapon of the Imperial Navy, Project 28. The Navy Ministry, in a fit of absolute desperation, has calculated that 200 million pine roots can be distilled into enough pine root oil to power a fleet. It takes 12,000 man-hours of labor to produce a single gallon of usable fuel. "It is perfect," Oki says, his voice cracking. "Take it to the still." He walks back to a makeshift refinery, a collection of rusted oil drums and clay pipes hidden under a camouflage net. The smell is sickening, a sweet, cloying scent of turpentine and desperation. Oki knows the science. He knows that pine root oil is acidic. He knows it will eat through the gaskets of a Zero's sake engine in less than 2 hours of flight. He knows it will foul the valves and seize the pistons. He receives a telegram from the ministry. It is an order to prepare a special fuel blend for the battleship Yamato. Oki reads the list of ingredients. It isn't a fuel formula. It is a suicide note. They are mixing the last of the bunker C with soybean oil, fish oil, and the toxic pine root moonshine they are distilling in these woods. He looks at the schoolgirls digging in the mud. They believe they are saving the empire. They believe that through Yamato's spirit, they can turn wood into gasoline. "We are no longer an industrial power," Oki writes in the dirt with his boot. "We are a primitive tribe trying to light a fire by rubbing sticks together while the enemy flies over us in machines made of lightning." He realizes the war didn't end with a bang at Midway or a crash at the Philippine Sea. It is ending here, in the mud, with the realization that all the courage in the world cannot overcome the laws of thermodynamics. Japan is dry, the empire is a hollow shell, and the only thing left to burn is the people themselves. April 5th, 1945. Tokuyama Naval Fuel Depot. The silence at the depot is the most haunting thing Kenjiro Oki has ever experienced. Once, this place was the beating heart of the home islands, a sprawling complex of pipes, massive silver spheres, and the constant, reassuring roar of high-pressure steam. Now, the pipes are cold. The silver spheres are pockmarked by strafing runs from American Hellcats, leaking nothing but air. Oki stands on the pier as the battleship Yamato looms out of the morning mist like a ghost. It is the most powerful ship ever built, a 72,000-ton testament to Japanese engineering. But as it pulls alongside the pier for Operation Tengo, Oki feels only a crushing sense of pity. "Commander Oki," a fuel officer says, his voice a whisper, "the requisition is for 4,000 tons. We only have 2,000 in the main tanks." Oki looks at the Yamato. To reach Okinawa, the site of the final American landings, and engage the enemy fleet, the ship needs at least 5,000 tons for a round trip. "Drain the bottom of the sumps," Oki orders. "Scrape the sludge from the holding tanks. Take the fuel from the small escort ships that aren't sailing. Everything. Give them every drop we have left in the city." He watches as the hoses are connected. Usually it takes hours to fuel a ship of this size. Today, the pumps run dry in 40 minutes. The hoses are disconnected and they don't even drip. There is nothing left in the lines, not even a cent. Oki knows the truth. The Yamato isn't going on a sortie. It is a one-way funeral procession. The admirals have called it a special attack, but Oki knows the technical term. It is a ship with a half-empty tank and no hope of return. April 7th, 1945. The East China Sea. Oki sits in his small office in the ministry, the windows taped over to prevent shattering from the B-29 raids that now occur with terrifying regularity. He has a stopwatch on his desk. He is tracking the Yamato's progress by the clock and the known fuel consumption of its turbines. He knows exactly when the ship will reach the point of no return. At 12:32 p.m., the radio room down the hall erupts in frantic activity. The American carrier planes have found the fleet. Oki doesn't need to hear the reports to know what is happening. He closes his eyes and visualizes the scene. Hundreds of American planes that have been flown by pilots trained for 300 hours on high-octane gasoline, swarming the Yamato. The battleship is trying to maneuver, but every turn, every burst of speed, drains the precious, sludge-filled fuel from its bunkers. By 2 p.m., the Yamato is dead in the water, not just because of the torpedoes, but because the mechanical heart of the ship has finally stopped. The pumps have nothing left to suck from the bottom of the tanks. A massive explosion rocks the distant horizon, so powerful it is recorded on seismographs in Japan. The Yamato's magazines have ignited. The pride of the empire is gone. Oki looks at his stopwatch. It has stopped. August 15th, 1945. The ruins of Tokyo. The war is over. The emperor's voice, thin and crackling over the radio, has commanded the unbearable to be born. Oki walks through the charred remains of the city. He passes an abandoned truck, its hood open, the engine missing. Nearby, a group of citizens is still frantically digging for pine roots in a park, not yet realizing that the demand for their labor has vanished. He reaches the harbor. In the distance, he sees the silhouette of an American tanker, a T-2, sitting low in the water. It is steaming toward the docks, its funnel pouring out a steady, confident plume of gray smoke. It is followed by another, and another, a bridge of ships. Oki sits on a scorched pier and pulls out his old Stanford notebook. He turns to the back page, where he had once calculated the industrial capacity of the United States back in 1941. He had been right. The numbers hadn't lied. The war hadn't been lost at Midway or Leyte Gulf. It had been lost in the refineries of Texas, the shipyards of California, and the minds of leaders who believed that spirit could replace supply. He picks up a small piece of charcoal from the ground and writes a final entry in his ledger. The modern world is a machine. A machine requires oil. We tried to stop the world, but we forgot to check the gauge. Now the machine continues, and we are merely the dust in the gears. Oki stands up and brushes the soot from his worn uniform. He looks at the American tanker as it docks. He sees a young American sailor standing on the deck, casually tossing a half-eaten orange into the water. To the sailor, the orange is nothing. To Oki, it is a symbol of a nation so overflowing with resources that it can afford to waste. He turns his back on the harbor and begins to walk toward the future, a future where Japan will have to rebuild, not with swords, but with the very thing that defeated them, the cold, hard logic of the machine.